Hello and welcome, I'm Hullhound and today we'll be continuing to make our Frogger clone in Godot 4. If you haven't already, I recommend starting from part 1. In the last video, we created a series of vehicles to act as obstacles for our player. In this video, we'll make those obstacles actually collide with the player. In order to have the vehicles kill the player, we need to know when they collide. We can do that by giving the player and each of the vehicles a shape. And then we can use the Godot's physics engine to tell us when the shapes collide. We can do this by going to the player scene and adding an Area 2D node. This is the node that Godot uses in order to tell us when something has collided with something else. In order for it to work, it however needs a collision shape, which we can add. For the purpose of this, we can keep it nice and simple. If we select a box or a rectangle shape, we can then set its transform to 8 and 8, since we know ours is that size. And then we can just shrink this to being specifically, I like to do 1 pixel less than the shape on each side. So if we zoom in, we can see that there is a little gap, and that's just a little bit more forgiving to your player if need be. We can do exactly the same thing for the vehicle node by adding an Area 2D and then giving it a collision shape 2D. And then setting it to a rectangle shape 2D. 14, 14, so that's 16 minus 2, 1 for each side. And then set its position to be in the center, which is 8, 8. Again, just makes it a bit more forgiving for the player. Next, we should give each Area 2D a type. So in this case, we're interested in player and vehicle, or in this case, damage source. To do that, we go to Projects, Project Settings, scroll down to Layer Names, and then we're looking for 2D Physics. So we can select up to 32 different layer names. We'll only be using a few of these. Let's call the first one World. That's the default one that will be selected. Then Player, and then Damage Source. We can then close those. By going to the Area 2D node, we can look for Collision under Collision Objects 2D. And here we can see we have Layer and Mask. Layer is just what the type of this current object is, and then mask is the type of object that it would receive an event for if it collides with. So we're not interested in damage source colliding or being notified of anything else, and we're only interested in categorizing this as a damage source. If you hover over, you can see what type it is. Each area can be multiple types, but in our case, it's just damage source. We'll also do the same for player by going to Area 2D and changing our collision. In this case, we'll make it player, and then damage type we're interested in is just the damage source. In order to hook into the physics system, we need to create a script on the player. Let's call it player. And then we need to connect the signal on the Area 2D node. So a signal is a property of a variety of different nodes that just allow a outbound message effectively. In this case, we're interested in node and then signals, the area entered node. What that means is when another area enters this area, based off the mask we saw previously, then this event should be triggered. So in this case, we know that if this event is triggered, it's only because a damage source has entered the area. If I press connect, actually before I do that, what I will do is I will rename this damage source detector. The reason I'm doing that is because it gives you slightly better names by default if you name the node with the correct thing. So in this case I want it on the player, on damage source detector entered. So what I can do, just to make sure this is working, is I can print a message here. If I then press F5 to run the game and keep an eye on my output at the bottom, if I move into traffic, I'll see that it says hit whenever I enter into a new collision with a vehicle. So what I want to have happen is that if a player hits a vehicle, they should be respawned back to their starting location. So in order to do that, what I want to do is add a export variable, respawn location. In this case, we'll take a marker 2D. A marker 2D is a 2D marker, which is effectively a location. That's a specific type of object, which we'll touch on in a moment. And then what we'll do is, when we get hit, we will set our player's position to equal the position of the respawn location. Sorry, self.position. Okay, so if we go to level, go to our 2D view, add a marker 2D node, call this respawn point. What I'll just do is I'll take my 112 and 192. So if we just go to respawn point, we can set our coordinates to that. You can see the little markers moved around. We then need to assign the respawn point to the player. Go to player, assign respawn point, and then press F5. When we collide with any vehicle, we will return to our starting location. Let's make the death a little bit more impactful by adding a blood spatter. In order to do that, go to the player node, add a particle, CPU particle 2D, and we then get this. So what we want to do is we want to change this stream of particles into blood splatter. To do that, there are a few settings we need to change. So to start with, let's make this a bit more explosive. So we'll set this to 0.8. Explosive just means how quick they come out in succession. We'll also make it a bit more random, because that's always good. We want to remove the gravity, because I want it to go out in a splatter around the player, which means we also want to put the spread up to 180. However, since we've done that, they're now not going anywhere, so we need to give them a bit of a velocity. So we'll give them a random velocity between 30 and 50 pixels per second. That's not bad, but let's increase the number. Let's put this at 50. That's not too bad. I'm going to make them a bit bigger. So let's make these between 3 and 5. Excellent. And then for colour, let's just keep them all the same colour red. To do that, I'll just set the green and blue to 0. And then I will set this to be in the centre of the player. And then we have a very basic blood splatter. Let's add it to the game. Let's rename it to blood splatter. Let's change it so that it is one shot only. That means we only get one splatter of blood rather than repeating. And let's go into our player script. So what we'll do is here, where we're setting our position, we're also going to set our blood splatter to start. So blood splatter dot emitting equals true. Then try that. What we'll have is our blood splatter. Obviously, we can see that it is happening at wherever the player is, but that's what we'll deal with shortly. So let's make it so that the player is only moved after the blood splatter finishes. To do that, we need to await for the blood splatter to finish. So we do that by await, and then blood splatter dot finished. Nice and easy. We have 5 to run that. Move into the way of the traffic. Blood splatter occurs, and then we move. We have 2 more problems. When the blood splatter happens, I'm still able to move my character around, and the player is still there. Ideally, it would be invisible while the blood splatter is happening, and we wouldn't be able to move. So let's do this one piece at a time. To begin with, let's take our sprite 2D and set it to visible equals false. And then after we've respawned, we'll set it to visible equals true. Can then run that. And we can see that it worked. We don't have a similar property for the direction input mover, so we'll need to add one. We do that by opening up the script, adding a new export variable called enabled of a type bool, which means true or false, and setting it to be true by default. We can then add a new condition. So if we're not enabled, we will return out of the method, meaning that none of the remaining code runs. And in our player script, we can set our controls on the direction input mover to be enabled equals false, and then enabled equals true. And then if we run that, it will stop us moving around. As a quick exercise, try making a particle effect that happens when you respawn at your new location, and then add it into the game. I'll go through it again in a moment, just to show you how it's done, but pause the video now and give it a go. I created this particle effect. I did that by creating a new CPU particle 2D node, calling it respawn effect, and adding it after our damage direction input mover 2D had been re-enabled. I use these settings here, so feel free to pause the video and just take a look at those. And I set its position to be 8.8, so similar to our blood splatter effect. That's it for this video. Remember to subscribe to be notified when part 4 comes out. Have a good day.